Children armed themselves with homemade weapons for protection at a young offenders institution in Kent, where violence was rife. So says a damning report into this institution. 228 makeshift weapons were found over a period of 6 months at Cookham Wood in Rochester. Some of the 77 boys it holds were kept in solitary confinement for days on end, 2 of them for more than 100 days, to manage conflict between the inmates. Prison inspectors described staff as demoralised and frightened, while some bosses stayed out of sight in their offices. The detention facility was placed in emergency measures in April.
It is a devastating report. Lots of children in solitary confinement and being kept in conditions that none of us would want our children kept in. In terms of what needs to be done, this shows that prison is no place for a child. Ministers need to take decision to close this prison that is failing the children.
Well, the Ministry of Justice told us that this is a deeply concerning report and we are already taking decisive action. The new governor of Cookham Wood is being supported by a boost in staff numbers and the new task force to drive down violence. This is helping to deliver progress, they say. Well, joining me now are the National Chair of the Prison Officers Association, Mark Fairhurst, and lifelong campaigner for young people, Chris Wild. Thanks very much for coming in. Chris, let me start with you. You've spoken to some of the inmates at Cookham Wood. You've yourself served time in an institution as a young offender. 100 days in solitary confinement. What does that do to a kid?
Well, you can imagine, first of all, you've got to understand where these kids come from. So they come from a life of trauma, they've been brought up into a world of evil, then they get incarcerated in these institutions where they're supposed to be supported, and then they get locked up for 100 days. You know what it does to them mentally and physically. It damages them for life, and that's what it is. The trauma is so epic. But also, you've got to understand as well is that they're children. They're 16 to 18. They're not animals, they're not adults, and they're getting locked up.
But they are violent.
But
many of them.
But violent, most of them are victims as well. They're forced into violence from birth. They're forced into this way of living to survive. And that's what people don't understand, the background, where they come from. Gang life on the streets, it makes these people into criminals, but they are victims first and children.
Mark, you're nodding there, but I wonder, why would you lock up a kid for 100 days in solitary confinement?
Well, the problem is Cookham Wood deals with prisoners under the age of 18, and that is the most violent cohort that we deal with throughout the entire prison estate. What do you do
throughout the entire prison estate?
Throughout the entire prison estate. What do you expect us to do with someone who, every time we open a door, wants to attack staff or wants to attack other prisoners because they're from a different gang? And that's why on Thursday, when I meet with the Secretary of State for Justice, Alex Chalk, I will be reiterating my call for him to issue parva incapacitant spray to all prison officers who deal with juvenile prisoners, because we have zero protection whatsoever at this moment in time.
You're going to spray them with something that incapacitates?
We're going to spray them, if they're violent, with an incapacitant to quell violence, yes.
Chris, is that the answer?
No, listen, I respect Mark for what he does, but that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just makes them revolt even more. They're children. We're talking about, they're not adults, and we talk about criminals. I've been in this jail. I've worked with these kids. They are traumatised, and when you do the proper intervention, you get better results.
Mark, what I don't get are these extraordinary numbers. You've got, for every offender in Cookham Wood, you've got 5 prison officers. 5 to 1 is the ratio. The cost of this place is it's more expensive than Eton College, and yet it's not working. Why not?
Well, if you read the report, there is a severe lack of management grip and leadership. Staff don't feel supported on the front line. There is zero consequence for poor behaviour from the prisoners. And there's zero
There sounds to be a lot of consequence for poor behaviour.
Well, there's zero support for staff. When you've got staff on the front line dealing with excessive levels of violence and all they've got to protect them is a polo shirt and a body-worn video camera, what do you expect? The majority of staff there are actually on sick leave because they don't want to work in such a violent environment. We need to get a grip of it.
But if they've given up, if the staff have given up, if they're dejected, if they're not even showing up to work wearing their uniform, how can you expect there to be any degree of discipline, let alone rehabilitation?
Well, that's down to the managers, isn't it? The staff are demoralised. They haven't given up. They want to be able to support the young people in our care and give them hope, but they're not being allowed to do that because of the lack of resource and investment.
But Mark, can I just ask you, what I am intrigued, when I go into these places, I see prison officers as security. They're not youth workers, are they? They're not trained specifically to deal with this trauma, to deal with these kids. They're there for a specific reason, and that's to use force if need be and security. And I think that's where we've got to bridge the gap. There's got to be you've got to meet them halfway, where we have more education for prison officers, more support, so they know how to deal with these young people.
But that's not strictly through because of the POA union, because of us, we agreed with the employer. Now everybody who works with juvenile prisoners is a youth custody worker and has a professional qualification.
But that's
and
not
that's
happening.
down to this union.
But is there
every single member of staff who works with youth offenders at this moment in time has a professional qualification.
But you wouldn't lock a kid up for how many hours a day if you had some youth training. You wouldn't do that because you would know that's going to be damaging for that young person.
But we can only unlock prisoners if we have the staff and resource and levels in place to safely supervise them. And we don't have that at this moment.
But the problem also is that you're storing up a problem for society and for them further down the line. They will be released. Even the worst offenders will be released when they're 40 years old or 45 years old. What do they do then when they get, returned back to society?
We've got a great opportunity in these prisons to do something constructive and purposeful. And I would love to see young offenders in that situation spending at least 20 hours a week unlocked, working on learning vocational skills so they can get hope. Because we can't recruit teachers, we can't recruit workshop instructors, there's no investment to give them work skills, there's no staff to unlock to give them the basics because they're all on the sick, because they keep getting attacked, there's no protections in place for staff. Who on earth would want to work in one of those environments?
Me.
Would you?
I would.
You would?
And I know, I get good results when I go into these places and you use different interventions. Mark, I agree with you, we need better programmes, better opportunities, but there's no rehabilitation in these places. That's got to be at the forefront of your objective, rehabilitation, getting them back into society, into the community.
Chris Wilde, should this particular prison be shut down?
Yes, 100%. It doesn't
Do you agree?
work.
Not at all. Get rid of the violence, get more resource in place, let's have vocational skills and qualifications.
But is it about attitude? You've got resources. The ratio is 5 to 1, for each prison officers. You've got massive resources.
But we've got excessive amounts of prisoners who want to be violent towards each other because they're from different postcodes, have no respect for authority and keep attacking staff. We need to get rid of the violence first and foremost.
You've got to change the narrative first. You've got to change the narrative first. We keep calling it a jail. It's a young offenders. Young offenders means it's got to be more therapeutic. It's not a jail, and they're not adults, and we've got to stop calling these people criminals.
Chris, a lot of the things that are happening in this institution would be illegal under, European law.
Of course, it would be legal if care experience was made a protected characteristic, because it would protect 16 to 18-year-olds, because young offenders is still classed as social care.
OK, got to leave it there. Chris Wilde, Mark First, thank you very much to both of you.